So a little bit earlier, you discussed how the U.S. is not very good at hearts and minds campaigns. Um, so one hearts and minds campaign that's been really, really horrible by the U.S. is Greenland. And I don't know if it's viewed this way in the US, but we were obviously shocked in Denmark. We've touched upon this in many shows in here, and the Danish government was somehow surprised that Trump had an interest in Greenland. I mean, you shouldn't be very surprised about that. It's been a defense interest of America for decades,
centuries.
Yeah, centuries essentially. So essentially, Greenland went to elect a new government, and they voted heavily against quick independence. I actually believed before all this before Trump came into office and started talking about Greenland, the sentiment in Greenland was very much different. It was very much, okay, we have this the next parliamentary period. We're going to vote for independence at that period. But now they realize there's one thing they hate more about Danes, and that's Donald Trump. So they're in a very strange position right now because Denmark is like, well, we can't really sell a country that doesn't want to be part of your country. Trump is insisting that he will annex Greenland. A lot of Danish people are afraid of a military invasion. I keep telling them, well what are you going to invade? There are no soldiers up there. There are 50 Danish police officers. You could round them up. So how do you view sitting in Santa Monica? How do you view this Greenland situation? Is it domestic politics or?
I wrote about this. Actually, when I was working in political risk, before I joined the financial industry, my first job was in political risk consulting. I worked for a firm called Stratfor, and it fell to me to write an analysis on this, I think in 2010 or 2011, when actually it was the first time Greenland elected sort of like pro-independence, pro-sovereignty, parties, or one of the first times they started talking about it seriously. And so my conclusion then is the same as it is today, Michael, which is that, look, Greenland can be independent in some sort of a, esoteric fashion, the way that San Marino is independent or that Liechtenstein is independent. Like San Marino is not, and no offense to anyone who's from San Marino, but God bless you. I love it. Love it, what you guys have done with the place. But the truth is, like, San Marino can't invite China to build a military base in the heart of, Italy. Like, that's just not going to happen. Like, Monaco is not going to lease its yacht marina to, like, the Chinese Navy. Like, these things are just not going to happen because then Italy or France, respectively, will say, like, okay, well, your independence is over. So you get a flag, you get an anthem, you get a seat at the UN. That's cool. You get to lease an office somewhere in Midtown Manhattan and send some of your, diplomats out to kind of live in New York. That's cool. That's all cool. God bless you. But you're not going to really be independent. And so I think that whether Donald Trump is the president or not, there would be an American sort of like, whoa, wait, what? Look, what are you guys doing? Hold on, time out, And so that's the first thing. On the other hand, the former Prime Minister of Denmark was recently, quoted. This is Helle Thorning-Schmidt. Sorry if I'm
no, that's very good actually. Yeah.
So the point is like, well, if you want more military bases, you can do it.
Yeah.
Like, no one is saying to the United States of America, you can't build 17 more military bases in Greenland. In fact, just call us or call the Greenlanders, and ask for it. 99% chance you're going to get it. So that's where the rhetoric is a problem, and it's a problem. And this is where, like, the Trump administration does do things for domestic audience. I understand it. It makes a lot of sense. I think in the case of Ukraine, that attack on Zelensky in the Oval Office and the idiotic rare earth mineral deal, which has nothing to do with rare earths, I keep telling, people, like, there is a logic to it. Trump has now extracted something from Ukraine. His supporters are now going to be committed to the future of Ukraine. That's not like, slow clap. That's actually a pretty brilliant maneuver. But when you talk about annexing Canada and Greenland, the problem is that it does cross some lines, and then countries are going to start to hedge because they have to. So in the case of Europe, of course, that hedging can lead Europe to become an adult geopolitically, not an adolescent, where it's going to say no to the US in the future, which is fine. I mean, I think many Americans are okay with that. And they're actually like, that's more fair world, perhaps. In the case of Canada, which is similar to Greenland, this rhetoric leads to suboptimal outcomes for the US in the long term. I mean, if you think about Canada, Canada's a milkshake with one straw in it right now. The US gets to extract all of Canada's natural resources at a discounted price. And when you start talking about Canada as a 51st state, Canadians are going to start making hedges. They're going to start building alternative straws into their milkshake. And I think that could have been easily avoided. Like, what I would have said to President Trump is like, look, slap tariffs on Canada. Like, why stop at 25? Put 100% tariffs. Fine. You can be tough on Canada, but don't threaten the country's sovereignty, because then whoever's the leader of Canada, doesn't matter, conservatives, liberals, they're going to start having to build these hedges. And I think the same is in the case of Greenland. The rhetoric is just not necessary.
No, exactly. It's like at one point there was talk about the United States buying Greenland. What would that even mean? What would you be paying for? I mean, do you really want to take over that whole welfare expenditure that the Danish government is holding up right now?
Maybe they do.
Fine by us. Fine by us.
Look,
it's $1 billion every year. I mean, okay, yeah. It's so, but you could probably pay the Greenlandic people to support it. But
what I would say, Mikhail, is that the issue here is that there is a process by which foreign entities, territories, political, constructs can become a state.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of using sticks, why not use carrots? Like, why not say, hey, listen, we're the United States of America. We're the greatest country in the world. We're going to offer Greenland a package, an offer they cannot refuse. Danes, Danes can't give you what we can give you. Like, here's what we can, Joe and Juice and Legos. Come on, we got it better. Here's our offer, and so there is a mechanism by which some foreign entity can become a U.S. state. They have to apply for it. They have to say, we would like to become a U.S. state. And that is the only mechanism, really. And so, the reason I mentioned this is that once you start talking about annexation and invasions, you cross kind of a Rubicon rhetorically. And I do think in the long term, it clearly has suboptimal outcomes for the U.S.
It seems to be a very, very steep price to antagonize an entire continent of allies, but just to get what effect out of this? I mean, they already have complete military freedom over Greenland. I mean, if they want to take over the social security expenditure, fine by us. It's a strange situation. Okay, moving on a little bit here, Marco. We have a question from Shafiq here. What's your take on Marine Le Pen being convicted in France and not being able to run in the next election? Quite big news, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree as well. It's a huge news. I mean, for two reasons. One, I do think that whether the legal case is objective or not, I don't want to speak to that. It's pretty clear that it is, that there was some malfeasance that happened. And that's fine, At the same time, like France has, I think, prosecuted or tried to prosecute every single former president who's ever been in power. So, it's kind of par for the course in France. What I would say is that what happened in Romania, what happened to Donald Trump in the United States of America, whether you think this is legally justified or not, whether the case is strong or not, it is perceived as politics. And I think it generally backfires for the establishment, whoever the establishment is. And so that's the first thing I would say. I think that there's a pattern of establishment regimes effectively trying to use legal tools to avoid having to face populist challengers. And I just don't see that as being successful. So that's the first issue. The second issue is that I think it's going to split the far right or the populist right. Let's not call them far right because they're not really far anymore, especially not Marine Le Pen. I think that I don't see her successor, Bordella, being basically capable of uniting the forces of the right the way that she did. And so, in a way, I do think this is a very, it might be successful in the short term, decapitation of the right ahead of the next election in France. However, I think in the long term, it doesn't serve the purpose of democracy. And I don't mean that in some normative case. I actually think that one of the reasons that Denmark, Austria, almost every country in Europe, other than Germany, where Alternative for Deutschland continues to be quite Eurosceptic, the reason that all of the other parties across the European continent who were once far right have become far more center right is because they were allowed to participate in coalitions, they were allowed to participate in parliaments, they were allowed to sit, they were allowed to field candidates. And then through this process, often through parliamentary democracy, which I do think is superior in kind of like moderating some of the extremities, I think that through that legislative and democratic process, parties that are once extreme become almost educated. And I think it's a really bad mistake when they are basically barred from running.
Yeah, I agree. Even in Sweden, you have the Sweden Democrats being part of the coalition. You're probably going to get that in Germany at some point as well. And let's see about France. I do think, as you're alleging, also that this could turn out to be some kind of martyrdom for Le Pen and for the party. Perhaps they've taken a decision that they would have taken anyway. Let's see about Jordan Bardella. I'm perhaps not quite as bearish on him, but we don't know. We'll have to see where that ends up. Very, very interesting. Also, of course, something that global investors are going to watch very, very closely. So we have one more question here. I'm skipping a little bit back in our timeline here, and maybe, as you said, you're not following the Israeli-Palestinian war that closely. I'll be a horrible host and answer this myself. A question from Paul: what will be the outcome of the Israel-Hamas war? Will the Palestinians be moving to another country? So, in my view, the suggestion by Trump that he would buy Gaza and relocate all the Palestinians, he actually more or less got out of that what he may have wanted, or at least what I wanted out of that, which was to sort of awaken some of the Arab neighboring countries, because obviously it's unsustainable for Israel to keep occupying the Gaza Strip, but the neighboring Arab states, Egypt, the Gulf countries, they have the manpower, the resources, and absolutely the money to basically rebuild Gaza and to save Gaza. But they've essentially, when Israel pulled out, was it in 2005? They essentially they didn't want anything to do with Gaza, and now they've got this huge problem on their hands. But it seemed like that message from Trump that he was going to buy Gaza, that was, even one thing they feared more than Hamas returning to power. That was Trump taking power in Gaza. So it seemed like it mobilized some of these countries. Let's see where. So I don't see. Yeah.
So sorry to interrupt, but maybe Trump is actually secretly a massive genius. And threatening to annex and invade Greenland was a way to get the Europeans to defend themselves against maybe even one day America. It's like he is like a teaspoon of that disgusting fish oil we all had to eat when we were young. Like it's bad for you, but you get stronger.
Yeah. You learn to appreciate what you have. I think that's very much the case for Greenland. And be very, very careful what you wish for here.
But on your point, I will say this. I'm so glad that you stepped in that kind of pothole for us here and just answered that question. The Israel-Palestine issue, wow, there's just so much passion around that, and people are just for the most part, unable to deal with it objectively. I've lived in the region. I grew up for part of my life. I'm from Yugoslavia. I'm from Belgrade, but I lived in Jordan and Iraq, actually, part of my childhood. So one of the things I would say is that my experience in the Middle East is that very few governments in the Arab world actually care about Palestinians in any way, shape, or form. So that's to your point that Trump is finally starting to kind of wake up, perhaps some of them. But there is one that really cares about it, and that's Jordan, for a number of different reasons, including the fact that in 1971 there was actually a coup d'état against the Jordanian monarchy organized by the PLO. When they were basically expelled. 70% to 80% of Jordan is of ethnic Palestinian origin, not Jordanian or Hashemite or like Bedouin. And so there is this kind of a problem there where the king of Jordan, who is one of the closest U.S. allies in the region for the past 20 years, is in a very delicate situation. And so for Jordan, this actually does matter. And I think at some point, it could boil over. Another country is Egypt as well, like next door, although I would say that, the population is not as, I think, obviously it's pro-Palestinian, obviously, relative to Israel, but I don't think they're as emotional as perhaps the Jordanian population, given that it is majority Palestinian. The reason I'm saying this is that we often ignore Egypt and Jordan when we talk about this issue. We focus on Saudi Arabia, Iran, which sort of has interjected itself into this just to be annoying, quite frankly. But the natural ones that actually care are Syria, where we have a regime change, where we don't know where it's going. We have Jordan and we have Egypt. And I would say that at some point, I think Israel may go too far. And I don't mean that from a normative perspective, so please don't send me hate mail. I simply say at some point, countries that actually have been quite silent and on the sidelines could interject themselves. And the last thing that I think Israel wants to do is have to shift resources to the Jordanian River, to the banks of Jordanian River, which it hasn't had to defend really for the past 30 years. I mean, it's a pretty sweet deal where you don't have to defend your entire eastern border. So that's just something I would point out.
I agree completely, and that speaks to a broader point I have, which is also a little bit, a little bit of a hot take on that. But Israel and Hamas are playing different games, and that's the way to strategically understand it. What Hamas did accomplish by October 7th, in a very, very, very cynical way, was to reignite the Palestinian question in the minds of the populations of Jordan, Egypt, Syria, even Saudi Arabia. You can see that from opinion polling. They've obviously always been pro-Palestinian, but the regimes there are usually very, very, they move towards making peace with Israel because it gives them so many advantages. But there's a limit to how far they can go, and that limit is dependent on how big of an issue Palestine is within its population, the populations. So Hamas did achieve that, very, very cynically speaking. And they also won a generation of Western youth to some extent. Suddenly the Palestinian cause is alive again. And you could argue, that's my argument here, that Israel is playing the ultimate short game here. They want security today for their people, today and tomorrow. Hamas is playing the ultimate long game, that they want the Palestinian cause to just survive. As long as a single Palestinian survives, we may in 200 years get our own state. So in some way, I know this is a very, very cynical view, but you could argue that Hamas achieved what they wanted.
No, and I think one of the reasons for that is, I don't want to say institutional, but it's really sort of, it's about the structure that you operate in. And Israel ultimately does operate in a world where domestic politics is a very important arena for them. They're playing what political scientists would call a two-level game. So it seems it's short-termism, but it is, because you have to play short-term, because in short-term, if you don't get your domestic politics right and align it properly, you're out of power. And so I think that Benjamin Netanyahu has been under immense pressure domestically, and he's had to make decisions based on that domestic arena, not this big picture geopolitical. And as we talk about Trump, why sometimes he says things that are suboptimal geopolitically, it's because he's trying to rally his domestic support. Hamas doesn't have to do that because they're an authoritarian, effectively, terrorist group. And so they can only play the geopolitical game. They don't have to really worry about domestic support. There hasn't been a revolt against the rule. There hasn't been an uprising. There hasn't been really any sort of debate in Gaza, like, hey, maybe we should not have attacked Israel on October 7th. None of that. And so they can purely operate on that kind of a longer term. So I agree with everything you said. I would just explain Israel's thinking, through the prism of domestic politics. And I think oftentimes when we do these around the world things, Mikhail, it's like we're trying to cover the whole world in like 60 minutes. And it's so easy for us talking heads on YouTube to just focus on like grand strategy, the Northern European plain, Russia, Ukraine. But, domestic politics is obviously, I think, as important arena in some cases for those politicians who are very domestic political animals. It's even more important than anything else.
Yeah, that's the thing about the Houthi movement as well, which I think is being misunderstood. That's obviously they're using Gaza and the Palestinian cause as a front for that, but it's all about domestic politics. I mean, they have strengthened their grip on Yemen immensely. And the more bombs the U.S. drop on Yemen, the more support they're going to have internally, because and in the region as well, among other groups. So yeah, okay, Marco, we're getting close to the end of the show. I just wanted to circle back a little bit to where we started on the tariffs and sort of line all this up in the very big game, the U.S.-China game. Get some of your thoughts on that, because it seems to me that China has been very quiet and very patient on this whole tariffs issue. Do you think there's a wider deal between the U.S. and China coming up, or how do you view that?
Yeah, I do. I don't think that Trump is different from the first administration. I think what you saw in the first administration is, like largely what he's doing in the second. I think that he is using maximum pressure. I've joked he has these 7 steps of maximum pressure. The first step is to ask for that escalator or staircase to the moon. But the last step, he gets an escalator or staircase to the roof of his house. So I think China is one of the only countries in the world that just understands that and is comfortable with that. And, they're just saying like, okay, well, let's just go through this entire process. Let's not antagonize President Trump. And let's get to that part of the negotiations where he asks us for a staircase to the roof of his house. And it's like, fine. Phase 1 deal being a great example of this last time around, where it was kind of like, wait, all this entire trade war so that China can buy more soybeans? It's like, okay. So I think that's the one reason. The second reason is that President Trump is not a national security hawk. Like, he's just not. National security hawks in the United States of America formed an alliance with the MAGA camp because they both saw China as sort of a punching bag in many ways. And so President Trump attacked China from an economic perspective, and he uses the verbiage of national security because it helps him in negotiations with China. But somebody who puts Hegseth or Gabbard into positions of power is clearly not like part of that intelligence military nexus. I mean, this is not a national security hawk. And I think that many are starting to realize that in Washington, D.C., that this is a president who may cut a deal with China that is beneficial to the U.S. economy or U.S. corporates, maybe Midwest manufacturing workers. This is somebody who has, on the campaign trail, repeatedly said that he would be comfortable letting BYD build factories in Ohio and employ Americans. At the same time, the Congress was basically trying to ban Chinese software in autos, which is kind of silly because why would you ban Chinese software in autos? Because you're worried that some soccer mom driving a minivan becomes like a suicide bomber in case of a war. Like, this is literally what passed for national security nonsense in Washington, D.C. And Trump, meanwhile, is campaigning and openly saying to the crowds in Ohio, I will get BYD to build a factory here. Now, the media didn't cover that, the fact that he was doing that, because, again, it doesn't fit this neat narrative that he's anti-China. And so I think that, number one, there could be a pretty significant deal coming with China under this administration. And I think that therefore, the second derivative of that will be a pretty significant break between national security hawks and President Trump. And you already see little anomalies like TikTok, like him talking about slashing massively defense budgets, which also isn't being covered. But he has on numerous occasions said that he wants to sit down with Putin and Xi and negotiate disarmament, And so I think that these things really matter. And I think that, I think the chances of a U.S.-China deal have never been greater, in partly because President Trump has this ability to basically pass off any deal through his supporters. Whereas the Democrats, no matter who was in charge, Joe Biden or Harris, I think they would have struggled to sell any kind of a deal with China domestically. They would always be accused of being pro-China. You're just not going to do that with the man who started a trade war with China.
Very interesting. Okay, Marco, just to round off the show, I'm trying to, especially after a talk we had with Raul last week, I'm trying to gauge sort of the sentiment around Tesla. We're moving a little bit away from geopolitics here. I mean, where you live, you must be driving a Tesla, surely, or what?
No, I'm not.
You're not. No. You're not. How's the feeling where you are? Because where I am in Denmark, it's a very, very big Tesla country, a very, very big EV country. But I mean, if you park inside the city, you're going to have a swastika painted over it. I mean, even these new models that they're selling decently well, but only in some parts of the country. Like, what's your sentiment around this whole thing?
So first of all, I really kind of know my strengths and my weaknesses. I do not know how to make single stock calls, recommendations. What I will say to you is this: the way I will answer this question, because I don't have anything sort of smart to say, I will just say something poetic. I love my job. You know why? I love my job because I tell my clients I bathe myself in aloof indifference. I couldn't care less who wins or loses. I am a practicing professional nihilist. That's just the fact. And so what I love is when when my method and my framework and my worldview is proven correct, where X becomes Y, where everybody who supported X suddenly 6 months later supports Y. And what my cold nihilist heart is warmed by the irony and paradox that all these sort of MAGA conservatives now love an EV company. And all these progressive liberals are drawing swastikas on their cherished Teslas. And so that's what I'm going to leave you with. I think this is just what we need to take from examples like this is the fact that, you probably shouldn't really spend a lot of your mental calories on caring about anything too much, except like puppies and children.
That's a very, very strong way to round off the show, Marco. Great final remarks there. And thank you very much for joining the show. It was a great pleasure getting all across the globe, as we promised, in just about 60 minutes. Thank you for joining the show, Marco. Great pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much, Miguel, and to the Real Vision, of course.
Yes. And on that note, thanks to everyone for joining and all your questions. We'll be back with more geopolitical content. Be sure to check out our Macro Mondays talks every Monday with Andreas Dino. Thanks for now.